What color means on the violin basically is changing in dynamics, changing of bow speed, changing of bow pressure, changing of bow direction, changing of the amount of bow that you use. You know, you can use an amount of bow for a particular piece, you know, and then there's one note that you want to bring out. You can either make it longer or shorter, and so on and so forth. So it's a musical term, but there's a lot of technique that's involved in this as to how you produce it. You know, I can play the beginning of the Mendelssohn concerto with one color. It would sound like this. So it would have two problems. Problem is that the dynamic is the same. And the other problem is that it's just plain boring. So what I do is, so if I were to start, then I would start with one color and then I would let go. So if it go... And then notice how it all... I do something a little bit fancy with my wrist, as opposed to, in other words, you want to make sure that there is a slight flexibility in the wrist, and that helps you make the colors. Shifting is also another little thing that causes for a phrase to be different from one to another. You know, it's the shifting. The shifting meaning, so whether you go from one note to the other. So I'll show you something without a shift. And this is with a shift. See, so the between the F, I go without a shift, and then it's with the shift. Now, shifting is something that has to do with, well, the kind of style that you're using. You know, there were a lot of shifts in what we call it actually glissandi, you know, and in a real slide in the older fashioned violinist playing, you know. So you want to see if you want to hear a difference between a phrase with a shift and a phrase without a shift. So, you know, for example, if you were to listen to the first few notes of the Tchaikovsky concerto, I'll play it for you without a shift. You can go... Or so that's without a shift. But if I want it with a shift, I will go on the same string... So it's between, and then, so again, that's a matter of, people want to say, well, this is a matter of taste. I think, you know, I like my Tchaikovsky and my Brahms to be the old-fashioned way, in the grand style of violin playing. And the grand style of violin playing contains some glissandi or some slides and so on, which some people say, well, you know, we don't do it these days anymore. I think that if you play a piece and it's an old-fashioned piece, such as the Brahms concerto or the Tchaikovsky concerto or the Mendelssohn concerto, I believe in doing some old-fashioned things that, obviously, if I were to play an unaccompanied Bach, I'm not going to use slides because that's Baroque, and I like to do that slightly in a more pure, less romantic way, because, you know, when you play Baroque pieces, they're not romantic, they're Baroque. So, you know, so if you play the Gavottero, you're not going to go, you know, you're going to go like that, because that's not what the style is. It's always interesting to hear, let's say, 5 or 6 fiddle players, and to see how they affect you by what? By the brilliance of their playing, their technique, and what about their sound? Especially in string playing, there are two things. There is the sound, which is basically what you do with the bow. And we discussed the bow, how do you do sustain, you have the direction, you have the point of contact that gives you a good sound. But then after that sound comes the things that you cannot give to anybody. And that is the tone. So it's not so much the sound, which is the technical term of the mechanical thing that gives you a solid sound, but it's the quality and the beauty of the tone. So if you listen, for example, to the Meditation of Thais, played on the violin, the internet gives you immediately 6 or 7 great fiddle players that play this piece. So what makes one performance stand out as opposed to another performance? For me, they're all fantastic. But one performance for me that gets into my head and I can still hear it is an old performance of Fritz Kreisler. Now, the piece is easy, it's not difficult, but the tone is, and you're talking about an old recording. You're not talking about a contemporary recording with modern mics and things like that. You're talking about an old recording, and to hear the viscosity and the complexity of his tone is what just is absolutely mind-boggling. And that goes with anything, when you hear a wonderful musician. But the first thing that you hear when you listen to a singer, it's the same thing as listening to an instrumentalist or a pianist or whatever it is the tone. And that's the first thing that affects you, is the tone. And so I just find that it may not help you do stuff, but it might give you a better appreciation of what you like. It's up to you what you prefer. And sometimes you may not know what you prefer until you hear it. You says, oh my God, I never thought I was going to be affected by this I don't know what went on here. I was just totally flabbergasted. And that's really what you want to do. That's what music at its best does to you, that it carries you to heights of inexplicability, that you don't understand, but emotionally you're just, you can't breathe. I know that you're not prepared for this, but if you want to ask me any questions, what you want to ask me about anything having to do with fiddle playing, performing, this, that, it's like ask Mr. P. Feel free to do it.
I'm wondering who your biggest idols in regards to sound are. Like, not necessarily, violinists, but like any artists that you feel like are people to really listen to for sound.
About sound?
Yeah, specifically.
Well, I always say that when you hear somebody say something or sing something or play something, the first thing that your ear gets is their sound, is their tone. The beauty is the tone. And when I think about the tone, the first thing that comes to my mind violinistically is Fritz Kreisler. Just pure beauty of tone. I can see it, it's like, I don't know, butterscotch. I always like to compare sounds to food because, I'm a little crazy that way. So there's butterscotch here. And another incredible sound that I like is a great cellist, Emanuel Feuermann. He had the most incredible sound. And you can tell just by listening, and the recordings are old recordings. And now, a good tone is very, very good, but the person that has a fantastic tone does not necessarily mean that it will move you. It can be a very beautiful tone, but it has to have complexity, and it has to have an energy. You know, just a plain, very gorgeous sound can be a big bore. It can be, you know. There are many, many examples that I can tell you where people have this incredible sound or voice or whatever it is, and then it's a little boring. So when we talk about, for example, Chrysler, you know, he didn't just have a beautiful tone, but he had an energy in the tone and a complexity that made you sort of radiate as a listener towards him. Obviously, with singers, you know, when you think about the obvious person with a tone is, you know, when you think about Pavarotti, I like to call it iron. You know, there's like an inner core to the sound that is so incredible. And then, you know, I can give you other singers that are very beautiful and very musical, but they don't do what you hear immediately when you listen to somebody like that. So you're affected by that. I always find that the tone affects when I listen to anybody, whether it's, let's say, a wind player, you know, a clarinet player or an oboe player, you know, the tone is the first thing that just strikes me, and that makes me listen. And of course, that's what, you know, that's the first thing that affects you. And so the tone can be in anything, whether it's listening to Andre Segovia playing the guitar, plucking the guitar, and yet it sounds like a singer because of the tone.